specific stuff. Because this is largely an IT crowd and you guys have real companies that you work for and you're trying to do real work, I'm going to try to show you things that are specific to how this package management solution can make your life easier in an enterprise environment. Is anyone using NuGet today? Okay, a couple people, cool. So it sounds like the majority of you are not, so this is good. So we'll talk about like what it is. So NuGet is an open source package management system for .NET. It's run by the Outer Curve Foundation, and then Microsoft runs the Microsoft side of it. But all the intellectual property is owned by Outer Curve. It's not one of those open source projects where it's source opened, and then we give you drops of the source. The actual source code for NuGet lives on Codeplex at nuget.codeplex.com. And there are people who are not Microsoft employees who are committing to that source code. So if you're into open source and you're interested in getting involved, this is actually a project where you'll be able to commit code to a repository that will eventually ship in Visual Studio. So even though Microsoft is a little bit late in getting to the open source thing, I hope you guys see that we are trying. We're doing the best we can to make open source happen. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening in NuGet right now. We've already got thousands and thousands and thousands of libraries. It's pretty cool. Maybe you see yours up there. And more are being added every day. I'll show you some stats on that in a little bit. It's not just about open source, though. I'm going to talk about it in the context of open source, and then a little later I'll introduce some of the partners that we're working with just literally here at TechEd, like JetBrains and like DevExpress, and some of the things that they're doing to make commercial software more interesting and more fun using NuGet and how that's going to change things. A lot of this is an ongoing discussion. I don't want you to feel like any of this is an announcement about here's how it is or here's how it's going to be. This is all done in the open. Anytime I try to start a discussion internally about NuGet, I'm told by the team that those belong on nuget.codeplex.com. So there aren't private, secret discussions about the direction of this thing. These things are all being done in public. So if there's something that you need or your company needs from this solution, you can have those conversations in public. You can commit patches to this product. And we are releasing it about every month. So we're on version 1.3, 1.4 is being worked on. So it's moving very fast. It'll auto-update itself. And if there's something that you see today that you'd like or don't like, let us know, and we'll make sure that we make you happy. So what is the goal? What is the point of NuGet? Well, oops. Taking over the world. The goal is to make using open source software as easy as add reference. But not just open source software, making software, making reuse of componentry within the .NET framework as easy as doing add reference, because right now it's not very easy. Is anyone familiar with a tool called ELMA, E-L-M-A-H, Error Logging Modules and Handlers? Great open source library that provides you the ability to bring down a fairly complicated configuration system, but then set up your system so that you can do error logging and handling. You can get reported if there's errors. They'll page you, or they'll make an RSS feed of your errors. It's basically like TiVo for yellow screens of death. So if anything goes wrong in your system, you're notified, and it actually maintains that stuff. So how do you, how are we going to do that? How are we going to find ELMA? Well, the goal of NuGet is to build up this ecosystem. We want to make it so more people are making software. I don't want you to just become consumers of NuGet. I want you to start making things like ELMA. But a lot of people create open source software, and they put it out there, and they're frustrated because no one uses it. Adding a library to a project, getting ELMA and adding it to my project takes too much effort. It's irritating. It's frustrating. Here's how you would get ELMA today. You would go and you would Google with Bing for ELMA. You would then find ELMA. Hopefully that's the right one. Looking good so far. You click on it and you look around. I think that looks right. We go in there. Not really sure which one of these it is. Turns out it's that one. Depends on you. And cool. That looks awesome. Thank you for... I always think it's so funny that I'm holding a computer and I have another computer right there. They don't talk to each other. There's no Wi-Fi. There's no Bluetooth. But instead, I point my camera at the thing and then take a picture. Why don't I just maybe print it out, fax it back to myself, scan the resulting fax, and then email it to like an OCR? But no, QR codes are awesome. So that is awesome. And I go and then open the file. Save it somewhere, temporary folder, wherever. Make sure you have to go and hit properties on your zip file because it came from the internet, you have to unblock it because it's been marked as unsafe, and that'll make .NET angry. So you got to push that button. That's frustrating. Don't forget. Then you have to go and extract it into some folder. In this case, there's no real convention. Some people have a lib folder. Some people put them in the project level. Some put them up higher up. Then I have to go and say add reference. Go hunting for it and notice, hello, sir. Notice that there is, I have to go find the lib folder. There's nothing in the add reference dialog that knows that a lib folder would be an obvious place to put that, so I have to go digging around in Explorer to find it. Then I have to go and read the manual. This is usually where I give up. I have to go and figure out what's required, merge it into the web config. Turns out with Elma, because it's error logging modules and handlers, I have to register HTTP modules and HTTP handlers. And if I'm not using IIS Express, I have to add them to both system.web and system.web server. You get the idea here. Elma is only one DLL, and it works. And that's for a single assembly. Deeply, deeply not cool and difficult. And I think really cool open source projects don't get used because there is something to be said for some instantaneous satisfaction, some immediate satisfaction. Some people may think that that's an unreasonable expectation, that software should plug in like that. Maybe they're old men or women with long beards, and they think that software should be hard, and if you don't use awk in a regular expression, that you didn't get anything done that day. But I think there's something to be said for having that sense of, oh, okay, the basic naive implementation worked, now I'll go and I'll make it correct. I'm not saying that the default Elma installation should work for your enterprise, but when you're evaluating a piece of software, this is a nice way to see if it worked. So what happens, though, when I'm ready for build of number 2 of Elma, or I've got 30 different open source projects all working together in a single project? Lots of time is wasted, and it's very frustrating. And we think we can do a lot better. So what we're going to try to talk about today is kind of the basics of NuGet and what it can do. I'm going to dig in, because I assume you guys are all smart people. So we'll spend a little time at the command line. We'll talk about what packages are, making them, publishing them. We'll look at command line versus UI. We're going to go some simple examples. I'll try to dig into more advanced ones. But then with the focus on the enterprise, we're going to talk about NuGet servers, because creation of packages is one aspect of things. Consumption is another. But the thing that I haven't talked enough about is if you're an IT administrator, if you're a person who's supporting developers, or if you're a developer who is here to make change in your organization, and you want to go back and put together a NuGet server, I'm going to show you how to do that and make that happen. You can run your own internal NuGet server. We'll explain how that works. Then we'll look at how NuGet and source control can work together. Maybe look at some continuous integration examples. I'll do a demo that is the most complicated demo I've done in a long time, and it'll probably go horribly, and we will all cry. And then maybe if we have some time, we'll look at some extreme examples. Now, let me switch over here real quick and just show you a better example of Elma. So I'm just going to make a quick Visual Studio project here. And I'll just do a little file, new project. Making an MVC app, but it doesn't matter what kind of application it is. And I'm going to go to Solution Explorer, and I'm going to right-click and say Add Library Package Reference. And you've probably seen a dialog like this before. This is what the Extension Manager dialog looks like. I'm searching for Elma in the official NuGet package source, and you see it's actually doing a query to NuGet.org, which is a central server that we run. And I'm just going to say install the Elma Quick Start. See how it just appeared on the right side here? If I open up the web config, it's added all the Elma schmutz that is required for that to work. Run my app. And because Elma is something that catches errors, I'm going to have to cause a few errors. So there I made a few errors. And there's the errors. And just like I said, TiVo for yellow screens of death. So now I can go back in time and see those errors and look at the full call stack and exactly what was going on. So all that click-through that I did a minute ago in the PowerPoint that takes between 15 minutes to an hour is done like that. We'll talk about how that works, and we'll dig into some of the details. And then we'll talk about the enterprise. big, boring companies. The problem that we're going to try to solve is this idea of sharing business-level components amongst teams, and also best practices. Because bringing down a piece of software is one thing, bringing a zip file down and saying, hey, look, add a reference, big deal. But then starting to add best practices, thinking about things in terms of a software factory, making it so not only did you bring the software down and get it working correctly, but you're doing it the right way, and you're doing it in a prescriptive way. So productivity helpers. We'll talk a little bit about that. And we'll talk about how those are solved today. So let's dig into NuGet and get into some details. OK. You're going to see NuGet show up in a number of aspects of a couple of different projects. MVC3 just recently shipped a tools update. And in that tools update, we did NuGet packages out of the box. So what that means is when you say File New Project and hit OK, some of the packages are pre-installed. This is something that you can do at your company when someone says File New My Company application. There's a file here called packages.config. I'm going to open that file up. And you can see that the Elma package that I brought down, and there's also an Elma Quick Start. I'll show the differences between those in a minute. But jQuery, Modernizer, and the Entity Framework came already plugged in. So why is that a big deal? I mean, what's the difference between File New Project, and I've got jQuery built in like we had in MVC3, and File New Project with the new tools update, where I still have jQuery plugged in, except it's a NuGet package, right? Big deal. Well, the issue is that every time we release a new version of ASP.NET or MVC, and we include whatever the freshest version of jQuery is, that same day at lunchtime, jQuery comes out with like a new version. So I can go and say, add library reference. I can click on updates. And I can see that NuGet has queried up to the sky and discovered that there is actually a new version of jQuery. So I've got, what do I have here? Version 151. And they've released 161. So I'm going to go and hit update and watch this right-hand side here. So now I've updated those live references. Same thing would happen, of course, if I had stuff with Entity Framework or whatever. Any package can be updated. Notice now that Visual Studio is telling me that packages.config has been updated. Watch this area here when I hit yes. Now it's been refreshed. So the packages.config is a file that sits in your project that just tells you, here are all the packages that you have. Now the interesting thing about packages.config is that that's all you need to check into source code. You don't necessarily have to plug in your packages folder, which contains all the actual stuff. This means that I could hand one of you a solution file, and it has a packages config in it. And if you didn't have any of those products or any of those packages, then you could go and spin through packages.config and get them all. So that's a nice manifest that says here are the open source projects or the commercial projects or the internal projects that we rely on in this particular project. So where are these stored? Well, I'm in MVC application 38. I right-click here and say Open in Windows Explorer and go up one folder. There's a folder here called Packages. Inside that is a list of the repositories that these packages came from, and then the packages themselves. So here's Elma. So for example, Elma 1.2. If I can go inside there, we've got a new package file and then a live folder. The live folder has the Elma DLL. But this thing here is where the magic is. What I can actually do is I'm going to just copy-paste that, and I'm going to rename it .zip. And then I'll just unzip it here. And then there's a spec file inside. So all a NuGet file is a zip file, just like everything is. Everything is a zip file now. Do you know that? Word documents are zip files. Excel documents are zip files. Everything's a zip file. It's easy. It's a file system within a file, right? That's why everything's standardizing on zip. So here is an example of a new spec file. So the Elma folks wrote one of these. Atif, Aziz, and friends wrote this. They've got a license URL, whether or not they require acceptance of the license. They've got a series of tags. This is the Elma 1.2 that includes only that library. There's nothing else interesting there. But if we look at the Elma Quick Start, which is in fact the one that I picked, let's open that guy up and look at his spec file and compare them. The little Windows 7. Okay, Quick Start's on the right, Elma's on the left. The Quick Start got all the same details, but notice the dependency on line 17. So this Quick Start included some basic web config. So what they've done is they separated their project into two pieces. The core DLL, which is an Elma on the left there, and that's their spec. Notice it doesn't say anything about the DLL itself. We'll talk about that. And on the right-hand side, same information except we have a dependency. So what they've done is they've taken their web config and they've called that Quick Start. So all that package consists of is what's called a web config transform. You don't have to see that, even though I made it small. I just wanted to show you that that's all there is. That's the stuff that you'd ordinarily have to type yourself by reading the manual. That's not a complete web config. It's actually just the stuff we need to add. NuGet automatically takes a web.config.transform file and does a tree add. It looks at your web config. It says, do you have any of these nodes? And it goes blip, 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 blip. It's not an XSLT. There's nothing fancy going on there. It literally just says, do you have any of these nodes? And it adds them for you. What's nice about that is we can then subtract them. I can remove Elma from my project in a non-destructive way. So I'll come over here to my application, and I'll open up the web config. You can see here's Elma up here, and there's more down at the bottom. And let's go and say installed packages, and I'll uninstall that Quick Start and uninstall Elma. And it says web config has changed. And it put it back the way it was, which is really cool. Not complicated. There's no code that you had to write as a package owner to do that. You simply say, here are the things that we need, and we add them, and then we remove them. There are ways for you to do more complicated things, but it just works type stuff literally just works. So these NuPack files, how do we make those? Well, let's do this. Let's hop out to the command line, and let's go off and let's see, dev TechEd library. I can come out here and I can say NuGet, and I have a NuGet command line. NuGet command line can even update itself. So I can see that I'm up to date. It would actually update itself in place, that little command line. So you don't have to have Visual Studio on your build servers or any of your other headless machines or machines that don't have Visual Studio in order to make this work. I'll say NuGet spec. And it's going to make a spec file for me. So there it just spit out a spec file. And we can all read XML, right? It's human readable. Unfortunately, it's also manager readable. But we can fill this information out, and we've got a spec file. Well, NuGets expect things to be laid out a certain way. They want a content folder, a live folder, and they want a tools folder. And then if I say NuGet pack, it'll package all that up. That's all the conventions. You've learned everything there is to know about NuGet. Content folder, it'll drop anything that's in the content folder in Visual Studio. Live folder, anything in there will get added as a reference. And the tools folder is where we put PowerShell scripts for more advanced stuff. And that's a convention. So we noticed that the Elma NuSpec file didn't reference any DLLs. Because it doesn't have to. They're already sitting there in the file system. No need to repeat ourselves. Try to keep things dry. Now, that's a pretty decent example, but let's do one from Visual Studio. Let's go ahead and let's get rid of that TechEd one, and we'll do it a different way. Make dir TechEd library. Probably shouldn't have called it that, actually, because it's going to conflict. TechEd library. You guys will keep me honest. Hey, empty folder. All right? Let's close this guy up, fire up a new VS. we'll make a library. New project, Windows, class library, C dev, tech ed library. We'll do it this way. That'll be fine. I'll clean it up later. Okay. Here's our little class. All right. Boop. Okay, so I've got a little project here. Remember, you've got an assembly info in your projects. The assembly info is hidden under properties. I sometimes forget that it's there. But it's got a bunch of assembly level attributes. I've got TechEd library here. This is my cool library. I can add information to it. Company is me. I can change my version numbering scheme. So we'll say that this is not particularly ready yet. So we'll call it 0.9 star. By star, that means each build that those numbers are going to get updated. Okay? So here I've got a nice library. Come out here. Bin, there we go. So there's bin, debug. So our library got built. Okay? So what we can do is we can actually say NuGet spec assembly path bin debug TechEd library. And it will look at that DLL now and make a spec file, except this spec file has a little bit more information. Actually, I keep typing Notepad. I actually renamed Notepad to N because it saves me like a dozen Oatpads in a single talk. So I need to remember to use that. So here it pulled out my name, and it pulled out the version number and the ID that we'll use for NuGet. And I've got some URLs and stuff I could clean up. I could remove dependencies. But it jump starts that a little bit. So if you have an existing DLL, you can go and say NuGet spec and point it at that DLL, and you'll get a little bit faster experience. And in this case, then, we can, let's see, remove a few tags here. I'll pick, I think I have an icon URL over here. We'll put it right there. And let's pack that up. So now I've got a new package. So I said NuGet pack, and I've got my package. And then at this point, I might want to go up to NuGet.org, which is the gallery where all the packages live. I can go up and make an account up here if I want to. We've got lots and lots of packages. Actually, I think we've got stats.nuget.org. So it looks like almost three-quarters of a million package downloads. That's cool. 1,500 unique packages and 3,300 total. Something awesome happened on that day. I don't know. Download trend is good. So lots of stuff happening on NuGet. I can log in as me. You can go and make an account on NuGet. Go to my account. And I've got a super secret access key that is no longer a secret. I can take that key and I can pass it in on the command line, or I can set that key standard. I can grab that key like this, come out here, and I can say NuGet set API key. And now we've saved that for the default gallery. So I don't have to mention that again. I don't have to show anyone that key anymore. So then I could go and say, back up here and say manage my contributions. I can see a couple of things that I've created on NuGet.org. I can say NuGet push, and I say package location. And now it's going to go and push that up and then publish. The difference between pushing is pushing is the getting it up there, and the publishing is the making it visible. And then there'll be some caching, and in some amount of time and a little bit, oh, there it is. So there's TechEd library. So I've already got TechEd library up there, made right here, and published out there. So that's literally how easy it is to do the open source aspect of things. It's really easy. If you have anything useful that you've done that you want to get out there in the world, I would really encourage you to put it into a NuGet package. It's really, really easy. Now, that was a trivial package, and I've shown you looking at these packages by opening them up like zip files. But you'll notice that, let's see, these zip files, these files, let's look at packages. Let's look at ND Framework. There's a good one. Have a nice big icon, nice fancy icon. That's because I've installed a little click once application called the NuGet Package Explorer. All of this stuff you can get if you start at NuGet.org and go from there. You can install NuGet from here. If you want to learn more, you can get to nuget.codeplex.com and go to Downloads. You've got the Visual Studio extension, the command line, and the Package Explorer. I can double-click on this package now, and the Package Explorer will open up and show me what's inside. I can even make new packages and edit the metadata directly from here. So for example, if I wanted to go and make a new project, just like I'd been doing before in text, I could go do it here, all graphically. I can even come down to dependencies and go and find a dependency by searching NuGet, like maybe I depend on jQuery. So it's going to go and make a query, and I depend on this version of jQuery or that version of jQuery. I'll then add that. I can add as many dependencies as I want. I can also do framework assemblies, which are things that are in the GAC, because I might want to say that my application depends on system.data.entity, or something that I know is on the machine, but is something that I want to add as a reference. So if you know they have something in their GAC, you depend on it, we'll add that automatically to the GAC as well. And then from the NuGet Package Explorer, I can go and publish or export this as well when it's got content in it. A really good example of a great package that does some really kind of advanced stuff is one that's called the JSON. What is it? The JSON.net? Let's do this. Let's actually I'll show you a little trick. Actually, let me save where I'm at, and I'll hop over to temp, and I'll say I think it's NuGet install newtonsoft.json. Is that right? So here I am outside of Visual Studio going and getting a project and bringing it down and installing it into a local folder. And there's that new package. Now I'll click on that one and bring it into the Package Explorer and open this up. And this is great. So what this fellow has done, James Newton King, who makes JSON.net, which is a JSON serializer, is he's used one of the conventions that we've got for that lib folder. If you put a DLL in the lib folder, we'll automatically add that to your references. But if you have a folder that is either net2o or net35 or sl3wp, et cetera, we'll pick the right one and we'll add a reference to that depending on the type of your project. So here, he's got one open source project that works on Silverlight, works on .NET 2. He's got different builds. He only has to ship one package. So I only had to remember newtonsoft.json instead of newtonsoft.json.net 2, blah, blah, blah. So he's packaged it all up into one thing and makes it available. And you see that SL3WP, because we know that the new version of the phone will be SL4, we've got future-proofing there as well. And he'll be able to have the same package and a newer version support the new Mango stuff all in one place. So there's a slightly more advanced convention that he's come up with, which I think is pretty slick. And you saw that I was able to install that from the command line. So I've pushed my library to NuGet.org. I can go into a new project and make a new console application. And say add library package reference and hit online. And we see the TechEd library is there and it's live. And there's no magic powers that I have or my accounts have that you guys don't have. You could go and create a library potentially if you wanted to as well, and publish it up into there. Totally do your own thing, okay? I want to make sure you know that I'm not like being fancy. But let's see if we can make a local repo. Well, if I go to Tools, Library Package Manager Settings, there's a series of sources. There's the official package source, but multiple things can be a potential package source for NuGet. In this case, I've got a box in my Dropbox, Hansel NuGet server. And Phil Hack is running his own server up there. This Hansel NuGet server here is just a folder with a bunch of NuPack files. So the easiest thing for you to do at your work when you get back is just make a machine called NuGet or make a share called NuGet, add a package source inside of the dialog, and you're all set, and you've got it. So for example, everything's falling apart. There we go. Darn those hotkeys. Let's go into Dropbox. And actually, I bought a bunch of random stuff in here, including apparently pictures of Phil. And I've got Entity Framework migrations that I showed you today. And when I installed that, that's an unreleased package that I didn't want to share yet, so I just put that into my own folder. I can control the order of those sources within the NuGet Package Manager and say, well, I want my work ones to go first, and then I want the external ones. Or if in your enterprise, if you don't want to be using the external stuff at all, or there's specific open source projects that you don't want, you can even put in a filter there and say, I only want to have just these things. There's already projects, open source server filters to say, well, only show me NuGet packages that are within these licenses. Only show me BSD or whatever. So you can have filtered versions of those as well. Lots of people are downloading company-approved open source libraries, going to that work, then putting them into a share internally, and then removing the NuGet one to make sure that companies don't accidentally use open source software that they're not ready to go with. So that's another interesting way for you to kind of make your software factory work and control what the users are able to download. That's the simplest possible example. A more interesting example is the idea of actually running a server of your own. So running your own NuGet server. And there's basically two ways to do that. First, let's fire up Visual Studio, and I'm going to just make a new empty project. So I'm making an empty web application. It's got nothing in it. I'll put it over here. You can do this today as well. And I'm going to do this from PowerShell instead. NuGet includes PowerShell. So if you've been avoiding it, you can stop avoiding it because now you have no choice. It is built in, and it is enabled here inside of Visual Studio. So this is literally PowerShell. I can dir and run scripts and do all sorts of fun stuff. Some people like to go and right-click and say Add Library Reference. Other people like to go and say Install Package and do it from inside of PowerShell. I'll show you a couple of packages a little later that are more complicated. Down here I can say Install Tab Package. I'm typing in like Elma. I just typed ELM dash. I hit Tab. I can pick Install Elma from there. I can also say NuGet Tab. I can download NuGet from NuGet, which is extremely kind of Inception. Inception was a good movie. It was basically a movie that said that if you run a VM inside another VM, inside another VM, then time slows down, which has been, in fact, my experience. So install package NuGet.server. Watch the right-hand side. So we're actually bringing down a whole bunch of stuff, So this is actually a pretty good package as an example. It's a package that is complicated in that it brought down a lot of content, but it also uses Elma itself, uses NuGet.core itself, because the NuGet library it's going to use programmatically. And now if I run this, actually, I don't think I made an empty page. You see how it said default ASPX already exists, skipping? I'm going to torch that. I should have added a force to say I'm going to force this thing. But I can actually uninstall it and then put it back. and then I'll have my default ASPX that I was counting on. That's an interesting point, though. That small error on my part just brought up something really interesting, which is that NuGet won't stomp on your stuff. So I had an existing file, and then a package had an existing file, and it warned me in purple there saying, I'm not going to override that. The same thing applies with some of the scaffolding technology that we'll look at a little bit later. So this is a poor man's NuGet server. NuGet server is just an OData feed that looks a certain way. And I can just say, click here, and see that I have no packages. Well, these packages would go into the packages folder. So I'll open up this packages folder, which is empty. Here's our packages over here. Let's go down back to, was it dev, TechEd library. Grab that new package right there. Drag it into packages. Hit F5. Now my feed is updated. So you could go back to work, make a share, and that's the NuGet server, and that's cool. You could go back to work, and you could install package NuGet.server, modify it, make it work for you, do whatever you want to with it, secure it with some SSL or whatever makes you happy. You really are out there in the open. We're not hiding anything from you. There's nothing underneath NuGet. It's all just angle brackets and HTTP. Anything I drop into that folder there is going to automatically appear. This is a very simple, basic kind of way to get started with NuGet, as it is a naive implementation. But there's no access control of any kind. I can't choose what certain people see and what certain people don't. And I can't really control what people put in that folder other than if you have access to the folder, you can put something in there. But it might be a good place to put basic stuff for staging and things like that. It would be nicer if you could run your own gallery. So this gallery up here is actually running on Orchard. Orchard is our open source CMS, and there's been a couple of Orchard talks here. And Orchard's in itself a really interesting project. What they've done is they've taken Orchard and they've added that NuGet gallery and OData feed to it. So you get the sign in and the search and all that Orchard-y stuff, and it's a CMS, and it's a gallery server. And I believe in an hour or two, we're going to have up at docs.nuget.org directions, step by step, for how you can make one of these servers. I had to do it manually, but we're writing PowerShell scripts right now while I'm giving this talk. And you'll be able to go and clone a repo and run a PowerShell script. We'll set up IIS, we'll set up SQL Server, and you'll have your own internal NuGet gallery. So that's kind of cool. So I've gone and made one here. I made it the same color scheme as my blog so that there's no confusion that that's NuGet and that's me. Okay? And I can go and push content up there if I want to. From our TechEd library, for example, we could go and do something like NuGet push source, and I can point it at that feed instead of the standard one. By default, NuGet push will go to NuGet.org. Saying -source, it'll go here. Then I can pass in that TechEd library. And now it's pushing to my internal company one. Let me actually log in here. There is, in fact, some caching. So it'll take 10 or 15, 20 seconds before that refreshes. That caching is important because, like on the NuGet.org site, that's getting hit a lot. And we can't do complete fresh queries every single time someone's pounding on that, especially when you're seeing that we're getting hundreds of thousands of downloads. So I think it's a couple, what is it, Damien, 30, 60 seconds, something like that. My account on this machine has a different access key. So I can do the same thing where I say NuGet set API key, except I say this source for this API key. So you can have as many NuGet servers as you want. And I think that becomes really interesting in the context of a continuous integration environment, where someone could potentially have a daily build NuGet gallery and then the blessed internal NuGet gallery. There you go. So now that's up there. So then that's the only library in my project. And because it's using Orchard, I've got the ratings and the voting, and I can have multiple versions and all that kind of stuff at the same time. All right. So now let's do some demos that are going to break. You got a question already? Oh, why did I publish to port 81? So the gentleman wants to know why I published as opposed to port 80? And the obvious, because I got stuff running on port 80 is not working? I have a bunch of sites on this particular machine. Oh, why did I publish to 81 versus 80? That's why you're asking. Okay. So first thing is I've got a bunch of stuff on a bunch of ports. But that's actually a very good point. Thank you for mentioning that because it brings in an interesting discussion. So the gentleman is asking, why did I publish to 81? Well, the NuGet gallery is actually a kind of a two-tier application. It's two tiers in that there is the gallery server that lets you do voting and reviews and log in and that kind of stuff. But then there's the feed and the package management endpoint. Because you might want to have multiple clients. And that would be separate from the website. So there's the NuGet gallery server. In this case here, we've got gallery server on port 81. That's just a bunch of web services. That's the OData stuff. That's what received that information. Now, I could have put it on port 80 at a different vDir or put it on a different machine or whatever. That is the OData service, the package repository, and that's it. Then I've got this NuGet gallery, which then itself is a client of the NuGet stuff. So it actually calls that OData service and gets its information. It's not really talking to the database. It's talking to this service. So those things are separate. So again, if you didn't even want the gallery and all the voting and the Orchard stuff, you could still build just the gallery server, do it like that. It's up to you. So it's actually two sites in one. That's a good point. Thank you for clarifying that. All right, so let's do the hard stuff. Ready? No, actually, I'll do one more thing, and then I'll do the hard stuff. I'll postpone it for as long as possible. So I'm running my own gallery. And we thought this was really interesting. If an enterprise can start running their own gallery, then who else could do it? Because we talk a lot about open source software, but we haven't talked a lot about commercial software. There's open source that you may or may not be allowed to use at your company. But there's, in fact, commercial software that you use. Maybe you have subscriptions. You have subscriptions to like DevExpress. You have a subscription to all their controls, or maybe your enterprise has an enterprise subscription. And right now, you have to go and get that software by logging into their portal and then downloading it and running MSIs and doing a bunch of stuff. Why shouldn't commercial software be available in this way as well? Well, but then you can start thinking about issues of piracy and stuff like that. Well, we talked to the guys at DevExpress, and they came up with a pretty awesome solution that they're working on. And you can certainly stop by their booth and check them out. And I thought this was actually really clever. So if I go to NuGet.devexpress, they've got like their subscription place that you go and you check on the subscriptions. And this is where you typically download an installer to get their tools and stuff. And here's their news feed and whatnot. And if I go up in the corner here, I've got NuGet. I'll click on that. And I've got a URL and then a couple of projects. This URL's got this funny long thing in the middle of it there. Kind of reminds me of like how Google Calendars does private calendars. Well, what they did, which is so clever, is they created an OAuth. You may be familiar with OAuth with Twitter. This is where you can go and accept or deny or revoke important consumer keys. So they've actually got an access token system built entirely on OAuth where I can log in with my credentials in DevExpress. I get an access token, and I could have multiple ones for different people in my company. They are then hiding that either in a cookie, if you choose, or because NuGet itself doesn't support that, they'll put that actually in the URL. So now I'm going to now take the DevExpress specific private to me, this is private to me and only to me, URL, come into my web application. Let's make a new fresh one. We'll make an empty one. Probably an empty MVC one. And I'm going to just add into NuGet that new source, package manager settings. DevExpress private source. Hit OK. And then when I say add library package reference, I can say I just want to have stuff for my private subscription for DevExpress. They've got choices there for DevExpress MVC, which are their components. But remember earlier when we saw how Elma had quick starts? We're starting to get a convention going. And this is funny because these aren't rules. This is community, right? We figure this stuff out as a rule. They made it elma.quickstart. I personally like .sample. So they're going to have .sample, .sample, .sample for all their different stuff. I think it'd be cool if all open source projects had the standard one and then the .sample. So I click on .sample, see how it depends on the other one. So I'll click on .sample. That'll teach me how to use a grid. I'll hit install. It's going to bring that down. Install it. Now see, they have license terms. So this is interesting. This makes sense for a commercial software license. They've got license terms. And I can go and click on those and think if I'm cool with that or not. That takes me up to their EULA, which is totally appropriate. And I'll say rock on and hit accept. Then we watch the right-hand side, and stuff's going to start coming down. And there's their DevExpress controls. They've got controls for both web forms and for MVC. And what's cool is that their sample included a controller to teach me about stuff and a view to visit. So now I'll go and I'll run my application. Which is in one of these many. Here, let's do that. There we go. And I'll visit /DevExpress. And then we'll see a demo of their grid control where apparently I make $1. Thank you, DevExpress. Very nice, very nice. Oh, that's hot. Can I sort by salary? Where's the goo? He must be on page 2. Ah, there he is. Mark Miller. I want to go work at DevExpress. So that is an MVC grid from a control vendor, but it's licensed to me because it's my subscription. And because this is open source, this is the kind of thing that they were able to pull off and make happen. And I think it'll be interesting because now they might decide to contribute some of this stuff back to the NuGet project. I could see basic auth over SSL. I could see a formal OAuth as opposed to hiding that OAuth token in the URL. It should probably be a cookie header, except the NuGet client doesn't pass that, so that's why they did that. But this is a really interesting example of what someone could do with just a little bit of enthusiasm around NuGet. And I personally kind of want to throw that out to the community because is that something you want? If it is, start those discussions at nuget.coplex.com and we'll get other control vendors to do that and maybe standardize on ways to do it. Because I would love to be able to go up to like DevExpress or any of the other component vendors and see all the trialware and all the trial samples in one NuGet URL, and then all my subscriptions in another. Who wants that kind of stuff for their commercial software? All right, cool. So I'm glad that we took the time to do that, because it sounds like it'd be pretty awesome. And it really is up to kind of the willpower of those organizations to make that happen. So definitely rock on, and thank you to DevExpress for making that happen. So in an enterprise system where I've potentially got commercial software, I've got open source software, I've got one or more NuGet servers internally, I might want to go and create a continuous integration kind of an environment. So let's try to do this. Let me close all these guys. We'll shut down that one. We'll take our TechEd library, and let's go up to Bitbucket. In this case, Bitbucket is a Mercurial hoster. They allow unlimited private repositories, which is pretty awesome. So Mercurial is a very nice DVCS, distributed version control system for, and Windows people, it works really well. It's kind of like Git, but it's more Windows, kind of more Windows friendly. So I'll say create new repository. So I'm going to make some source code repository, and I'm going to go and take my TechEd library that we made, and I'm going to put it up here. So we'll say TechEd library. and say create repository. All right. And let's go to, here's our URL. So this is where our library is now. Mercurial is referred to as HG. I think HG is one of the elements, the element for mercury. Is that correct, people who know things? That's why it's called HG? If it's not, then I just guessed and I got it right, which is also nice. So let's do this. Let's go up and say, source control. And I'm going to say, bring that repository down, put in my password. So I've got an empty repository here called TechEd Library. I'm going to go and bring up Explorer. So there's that. And then my library, we'll bring that stuff over and then we'll check it in. I'll close VS. We'll clear out the bin and the obj. We'll get rid of that package. Grab all of that stuff. Actually, let's grab the whole folder and bring that over here. All right. Okay, and then I'll say HG add. And this could be done in TFS or Subversion or anything. I'm just trying to give you an example. I want to show you a bunch of things all working together. So don't sweat the mercurial aspect of things. Sweat there's a lot of moving parts, and it's actually possible to be done in a short period of time part of things. So add those, commit them. Hey, Lord help me, this will work. That's my commit. And then HG push, password. So we sent those things up to source control. Come over here and hit refresh. So there's my commit to the Bitbucket repository. So now I'm a real application, right? Now I've actually got source control. Now I want to take that source control and I want to make this a continuous integration build like you would in a proper enterprise. I want to have my build system do it. We could use TFS, we could use cruise control. In this case, I'm going to use TeamCity from JetBrains. And I'm going to say create project. TeamCity is actually an application that you can download and it'll run on your local machine. It has build agents. And what the idea is, if you're not familiar with continuous integration, just to make sure, I check something into source control, it notices that I've made a change, and it does a build. This is not about a daily build. Continuous integration is about build every single time. So I check something in, and we do the build. So let's go and create a project. TechEd Library. Create. And I'm going to tell it, well, what version control system are you in? VCS root, TechEd Library. And I've got a bunch of choices here. We all use different stuff. Use what makes you happy. I'll pick Mercurial. It says, where is the HG path? Well, it's in C program files. So I'm going to put that right there. Pull changes from. Well, that's going to be this URL right here. It's minus my username. And then here's my username and my password that it's going to use. Now we'll test that, see if it's able to log in. So now it says, okay, that's the right password, and I can talk to that repository. And I hit save. Now, that TechEd library project needs a build configuration. Build for debug, build for release, build for salespeople, build for whatever. And I'll just make like, debug or something. And I'll say, yes, debug will come out of here. And I could say with any continuous integration system, pull from this branch or pull from that branch or pull from the head. And if I want to, I could label it and things like that. How many people have build systems like this at home? They have continuous integration. How many people are building on Frank's laptop? Seth, thank you, Seth. Are you building on Frank's laptop? Because I did that for a long time. If you see that kind of stuff, you know to stop it, right? You can take that right to HR. It's okay. to release software directly off machines. It's good that a lot of people raise their hands for continuous integration because it's such a fundamental part of what we do. And often it's considered to be extremely difficult to set up. And I'm really heartened with you guys not using that. So techedlibrary.csproj, I think we called it. Let's make sure that's right. Yep. So that's what we're going to run MS Build on. And I've got .NET Framework 4. Hit save. Now here's the part that's going to be interesting. I'm going to have to do this manually. And you can do this too with your existing systems back home, depending on whatever build system you use. I'm going to say add build step. And you see this system, this whole pile of runners that these guys choose. Most build systems have this kind of option. There's lots of things you can do. And then there's the nuclear option, where it's command line. Okay? Custom script. So this is where I go right to hell. I'll show you my batch file. Don't tell. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go, and when I do my build, I'm going to delete all the new package files. I'm going to go and package up, and I'll change that to TechEd library. And I'm going to say for all the files that are built from that, in this case it'll just be one, we'll say NuGet push, and then we're going to send it off to localhost 81, and there's my secret key. And we'll save that. You see over on the side here, kind of typical steps that you would go through. When do I want this build to happen? Why do I want builds to happen? Are there dependencies and things like that? So now I've got one project called TechEd library that's never run before. And I have a build agent. Large continuous integration systems and enterprises usually have multiple agents all over the place on multiple machines. And you could say to those agents, I require you to have a certain thing. JetBrains has a feature where they can say, well, you've got 50 agents and 4 of them have .NET 4, so this build requires .NET 4. It'll figure out which agent. In a continuous integration system using NuGet, you'd want to make sure that they had NuGet installed or a way to get NuGet on that machine. In this case, I'm doing all of this locally. I'm going to say run. I could wait 60 seconds, or I could just start the run now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move a little fast. I'm going to click run, and then because it'll go quickly, I'm going to run over to the agent and look at the logs, see if we can see it actually happening. Click on the agent, and I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to look at the build log, and I'm going to hit tail. We'll see if we can watch it happen. So it's going off to Mercurial. It's going to go and get that stuff, bring it down into the build server. Here we go. It went and built it. Built project using Team TechEd library new spec, successfully created package with a different build version, and then it says package could not be uploaded. Package already exists. Let's see if we build it again, if it'll get a new version number. I didn't add .force, so we'll see if we build it again, if we'll get another thing. Otherwise, I'll make a change. Nope, already exists. So I could delete that package, or I could come out here, and we'll make a change. Version 2. All right. That's been modified. I don't want to take any chances that that'll break it, so. I've used up my karmic points so far, so I'm going to stay safe. Okay, so that just turned that change up. Switch over here. Made a change. I could wait 60 seconds, but I'll just go and say run. You can see my run history down here. While that's doing, I'll load up my gallery. Denied. One of the things that we're doing is allowing that version stuff to happen automatically with the new spec. If you have a different way of doing things, you can actually pass in the version on the command line. So there's a lot of different options. I'm counting on the assembly version thing to automatically switch. And in this case, that doesn't look like it's working. I could pass in -version if I wanted to, and then set that version from an environment variable or pick the date of the week or whatever. Okay. And here it says, pushing to publishing, package was published. And there it is. So what we just saw was going to Bitbucket or Mercurial source control, having that stuff cycle through source control, be brought down by a continuous integration system, in this case, JetBrains TeamCity, then taking TeamCity, using NuGet in a batch file, which is cheesy, and then publishing that up to a private NuGet server, which could then be used as a build server that could be handed out to the rest of the enterprise. But the guys at JetBrains have gone and done this, which I think is pretty cool. They've sent me screenshots of some of the work that they're doing. So check this out. These are screenshots of a future version of TeamCity with dependency triggers for NuGet built in, so if a repository changes. NuGet packages called out as first-class things inside of a project. Build steps that include publishing the package as an artifact locally, sending it off to a local repository or to a custom server like I just did, even made easier. As well as build features that will automatically have the build server go off and then take that packages.config that I talked about at the very beginning and then populate the build server with those things. And remember, where can those NuGet packages come from? Your enterprise, nuggets and stuff that you made from commercial software vendors that run their own NuGet servers, other NuGet servers within your company. I mean, I really want you guys to feel empowered by this, that this is going to save you time and allow you to do a bunch of stuff that maybe you couldn't do in the past. So this has got a lot of people talking, and some other folks around the company have started playing around, including Martin Woodward and some of the folks over at TFS. Let's bring up the Team Explorer. Are there any TFS people here? Okay, cool. So I showed Mercurial and text files and Java and Magic and all that kind of stuff. So I'll run over here. We'll talk about TFS and things like that. TFS, and you know I kind of lean towards the other side, but I have to say it wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. I set it up on my machine in about 10 minutes, so much respect to those guys. So in about 10, 15 minutes, what we did is we made a continuous integration build, and I have a little build agent on this system here. I can go in here and I can queue new builds for my project. I can right-click on this build and edit the build definition. That build definition has things like triggers that we saw, and TFS has some cool features like what are called gated check-ins, which means I'll only let you check it in if it actually built, which would have saved me earlier when I was having my trouble with my versions because that wouldn't have been allowed to be checked in. And then I can go down here to process. They have a notion of templates. What is going to be built into JetBrains with that NuGet functionality that we saw screenshots for, the TFS guys are working on a build process template. So I can go here and say default template with NuGet. You guys like that? Come down here, put in my NuGet API key, my output directory or my publishing URL, and then have that be part of my TFS build. All built in, so even easier and no batch files and no messing around with stuff. So if you like that, tell Martin Woodward and the folks at TFS that you want it. Find their blogs, Google them, they're walking around, go to their talks and say, we think NuGet is important. One of the things that we haven't talked yet about is the PowerShell aspect of things. I'll show you two things real briefly. I wanted to see how far we could go with PowerShell. You can, since you're running inside of Visual Studio, automate Visual Studio itself. You can tell Visual Studio what to do. Now, I'm still working on it, and it doesn't quite work yet, but I wanted to see if I could take an ASP.NET Web Forms application and with the combination of NuGet and PowerShell, combine and merge into a hybrid web forms/MVC application, because it's all just ASP.NET, right? So here I'm going to make a web forms application. This is a regular old file new project web forms app. I'll show it to you. That's what web forms looks like. And if I click on About, you see it says .aspx to prove to you that it's web forms. And then I'm going to go out to the PowerShell command line here. And I'll type in install package, add, and I hit tab. It's actually doing a dynamic query and dynamically populating that up. Add MVC3 to web forms. So watch the Solution Explorer on the side there. There'll be a bunch of errors and random stuff that'll happen on the left because I'm still working on this. But watch what's happening. So we've got a little bit of a failure. What's going on is that I tried to, and this is where I want you guys to be excited about this because we're pushing the edges of what's possible. I attempted to unload Visual Studio, edit the CS project, and then reload it. And it only works about 3 out of 10 times, and I know that to be the case. But we're actually writing PowerShell script. I'll show you this. Here's my package. I'll double-click and open it up into the NuGet Package Explorer. Here's what you would expect if you know anything about MVC. That's all the folders that you need for an MVC project, including the transform that sets up all the handlers and stuff. But check out this install.ps1. You can have an install.ps1 and an init and an uninstall. So in here, I go and add references to MVC, and then this is where it just goes all to hell. It's always good when you have comments like wrong in the middle of stuff. So I'm off in automation of Visual Studio, and I attempted to unload the project and reload the project. Now, that's not something I'm supposed to do, but it does make me feel like there's a lot of possibilities here. This is an extreme example of what someone could potentially do in PowerShell. Just because it didn't work is my fault, not anybody else's. But let's run it and see if, in spite of the mistakes in the script, if I can still hit /home. And I can. So now I have an application that is both web forms and MVC in the same application. It means all that automation. Think about this, software factories, right? That doesn't mean that you guys are SAC factory workers, but it means that the boring work is done by the computer. This is kind of a classic example. Phil Hack calls them recipes. What kind of things do you do on a regular basis? You may have also seen MVC scaffolding. Scaffolding is the thing that goes and generates a bunch of code. It's actually a NuGet package. We go and make a new file, new project, MVC3 application. Now you know why I have MVC application 95 and 96 and 97. I want to make a real quick model here. We'll just say person. Person has an int and a first name. And a last name and a birth date. Okay? I can go back over here and I can install package MVC scaffolding, which you can learn all about at Steve Sanderson's blog. And you guys can make your own custom scaffolders. Check out his mix talk that he did a couple months ago. It was amazing. Scaffold, controller, person. This is all PowerShell. So the NuGet package I just installed added a new function, a new thing called scaffold. So I can go and say scaffold person. It makes a people controller, actually knows the plural of person. Goes and generates, watch on the right side under views. It's bringing in create, read, update, delete. Now I run this application, hit the person controller. Oh, did he end up calling it the people controller? People controller. And now I've got a database and the ability to edit it. right there. And that didn't have any errors because Steve is a better programmer than I am. What's that? Can't hear you. It actually looked at my model code with reflection, took a T4 template, and then generated all of that stuff from that metadata. And then Entity Framework Code First created the database. You take a look at my overview talk from Monday or my talks at Mix, I go into in-depth detail about that. So even though this is about NuGet for the enterprise, those talks on scaffolding, MVC, and web forms scaffolding for web forms programming that I showed on Monday are all extreme examples of where you guys can go and do crazy stuff. And I encourage you to do crazy stuff. Like check this out to end here. I've got a package inside of the Hansel NuGet server called mood swings. And I can go and say set mood insane. And it'll automate Visual Studio and actually change the colors of VS. So I can set things to insane or to presentation, or I could even set them to Rick. So this has been NuGet for the enterprise. Thank you very much. Please go to nuget.org and check that out right away. That's all ASCII, people. I just want to give a shout out to Lee Holmes for making that happen. That's a lot of work. That's PowerShell, baby. I'll be happy to answer questions for a while up front here.